The occasional passerby glanced curiously at the young couple standing by the hospital entrance. She held a newborn wrapped in a pink blanket close to her chest, avoiding his gaze. He, in turn, seemed to be pleading with her, his tone earnest. From a distance, one might have mistaken them for newlyweds caught in a lover's quarrel. "Emily, please, come with me. Where else will you go?" Ethan's voice was steady but urgent. "No," she replied firmly. "I'm not going anywhere with you. You mean nothing to us." "Emily," he tried again, "I promise I won't abandon you or Lucy. I'll help you raise her. You'll never want for anything." She took a step back, shaking her head. "Ethan, let me pass. Leave me alone. I'll figure things out myself." "You have nowhere to go," he insisted. "The car's waiting. Don't be afraid." She hesitated. The landlady had asked her to leave the rented apartment just days before she gave birth. With nowhere else to turn, Emily reluctantly followed him. Ethan led her to a modest apartment, his childhood home. It wasn't much, but at least it was a roof over their heads. Ethan knew this wasn't an ideal situation, but he couldn't ignore his responsibility. His parents had always compared him to his older brother, Ryan, the golden child of the family. Ryan, with his perfect grades and charm, was the pride and joy of their parents, especially Helen. As a boy, Ethan had watched Ryan soak up their mother's praises, her frequent exclamations of, "My perfect boy, you're destined for greatness." Meanwhile, she'd often sigh and mutter, "Why can't Ethan be more like you?" The resentment grew as they aged. Ethan tried to find his own path, but his father insisted on toughening him up. After high school, Ethan moved into their late grandmother's apartment with Ryan, who was already a third-year medical student. While Ryan excelled in school, Ethan scraped by in college and later joined the military. By the time he returned, Ryan was already an established doctor in a private clinic, courtesy of their father's connections. When Ryan left town for his career, Ethan finally breathed easier. The two brothers had never been close. Living under the same roof had been more an arrangement of convenience than family unity. Ethan had stayed behind, finding his own way, but he couldn't forget Ryan's ultimate betrayal, abandoning Emily when she needed him most. Now, Ethan held the door open, letting Emily step into the apartment first. "Make yourself at home," he said, his voice awkward. "There's food in the fridge, and you know where everything is." He gestured to a room down the hall. "That's yours now? I'll be back soon, okay? Just let me know what you and Lucy need." Emily hesitated, her voice soft. "Ethan, I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't have accepted your help. What if he comes back?" "He won't," Ethan said firmly. Lucy slept soundly in her mother's arms, while Emily stared at her tiny face, worry etched into her features. Hours passed, and Ethan didn't return. She found herself pacing by the window, waiting for him. When he finally arrived, it wasn't just him. Ethan directed a team of movers carrying boxes into the apartment. "Ethan, what is all this?" Emily asked, confused. "You'll see," he said, brushing past her. In just a few hours, Ethan transformed the largest room in the apartment. A crib stood assembled in the corner alongside a brand new stroller. "There," he said with a satisfied grin. "Now you and Lucy have everything you need. This is your space." Emily was stunned. "Ethan, you didn't have to do all this. I'm not staying long. I'll be heading to my grandmother's soon." "Let's talk about that later," Ethan said, waving her off. "What kind of life will you have there? A leaky roof, water from a pump, and a doctor miles away? No, I'm not letting you go." She knew he was right. There was nowhere else to turn. She hadn't even told her grandmother about her pregnancy. For now, this was the safest place for her and Lucy. "Ethan," she said hesitantly, "can you help me get my things from the rented place? The landlady promised to hold on to them until I returned from the hospital." "Of course," he said, his voice gentle. "I'll pick them up tomorrow." Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Ethan. I'm a stranger to you, and yet you're doing so much for us." Ethan cut her off, his tone suddenly sharp. He didn't want to hear her finish that sentence, didn't want to think about Ryan's cowardice. "You're not a stranger anymore," he said firmly. "Lucy is family, and so are you. This is your home now." Emily felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She didn't know what the future held, but in this moment, she was thankful for Ethan's kindness. For a week now, Emily and her baby had been settling into Ethan's apartment. The space carried the sweet scent of a newborn, a fragrance Ethan found unexpectedly pleasant. He eagerly helped care for little Lucy, holding her with tenderness and care. The new additions to his life brought a noticeable change to Ethan. He now rushed home after work, cutting off ties with his bachelor circle. Their first week of cohabitation passed peacefully until a midnight knock shattered the calm. The unexpected visitor, finding the door locked from the inside, rang the bell incessantly and pounded on the door. Emily's heart sank with dread. Ethan hurriedly dressed and rushed to quiet the intruder before Lucy could wake up. Emily pressed her ear to her bedroom door, trying to discern what was happening. "Evelyn, what are you doing here? Why are you making a scene?" Ethan hissed at the woman. "I needed to see you," Evelyn replied brazenly. "I told you. We're done," he stated firmly, blocking her from entering the apartment. "So it's true then?" she accused, her gaze landing on the stroller in the hallway. "You've traded me in for your brother's girl?" "Emily isn't just some girl, and I don't owe you any explanations," Ethan snapped. "We broke up because I couldn't take your behavior anymore." "Does Ryan know you've taken her in? Or is the baby yours and that's why you're playing house?" She spat venomously. "That's enough. Get out," Ethan demanded, grabbing her elbow and steering her toward the landing. "And give me the keys." "Fine," she sneered, tossing them at him. "But don't think I'm done with this." As the sound of her retreating footsteps faded, Emily emerged hesitantly into the hallway. "Sorry about that," Ethan muttered, looking sheepish. "That was awkward." "Ethan, I don't want to complicate your life. I think it's best if Lucy and I move out," Emily said softly. "Stop. We've already discussed this, and you're not going anywhere. Forget Evelyn. She's just bitter because I ended things. She won't bother us again." Emily had crossed paths with Evelyn before. The woman's arrogance was unmistakable. She barely acknowledged Emily, acting as if she owned the place. But as the days passed, the incident faded into memory. One evening, Ethan came home to an unexpected sight: his mother, Helen, sitting at the kitchen table with Emily, a steaming teapot between them. "Well, hello, son," Helen greeted him warmly. "We were just having tea." "Mom, I wasn't expecting you back from the cabin so soon," Ethan said, caught off guard. "I couldn't wait any longer, and imagine my shock when I discovered you've been hiding this little treasure from us," Helen said, nodding toward Emily. "And a granddaughter, no less. Start explaining, both of you." "Does it matter where we met?" Ethan deflected. "I love Emily, and we're getting married." The words tumbled out before he realized what he'd said. Emily's eyes widened, but she didn't contradict him. "That's wonderful," Helen beamed. "It's the right thing to do. Our granddaughter should carry our family name." She leaned closer to Ethan and whispered, "Don't drag this out, son. Emily is perfect for you." Helen lingered well into the evening, holding Lucy and cooing over her. "You can't imagine how much I've always wanted a daughter," she confided to Emily. "Raising two boys was a joy, but girls are special. And you, my dear, are exactly the kind of wife I dreamed of for Ethan: capable, kind, and grounded." When she finally left, the apartment felt strangely quiet. Ethan broke the silence. "Emily, will you marry me?" he asked suddenly. "I thought you only said that for your mom's sake," she replied, unsure. "I meant every word. Take your time to think about it, but know that I'm serious." Ethan gave her hands a gentle squeeze. "No strings attached, though I wouldn't mind if you made your amazing borscht from time to time." Emily hesitated. "I'm not ready for a relationship," she admitted, "and I don't think I can trust anyone again." "Then nothing will change," Ethan reassured her. "We'll live like before, friends, roommates. For everyone else, we'll be husband and wife." For the first time, Emily looked at Ethan differently. She saw the kindness in his actions and the care he'd shown her and Lucy. While he couldn't undo the wrongs of others, he'd been her steadfast ally through it all. The next day, Helen returned, this time with Mason, Ethan's father. He'd left the cabin as soon as Helen filled him in on the events. Eager to meet Emily and Lucy, Mason came bearing gifts and immediately pulled Ethan aside for a stern conversation. "You should have told us sooner," Mason said. "And don't waste any more time. Make it official." The wedding was a simple affair, attended only by Ethan's parents. Emily's grandmother, unable to travel due to her health, received the joyous news over the phone, along with a promise to visit soon. Ryan didn't attend. He excused himself, claiming work commitments. His indifference was palpable. Even when Ethan had mentioned Emily's name, it didn't stir any reaction. Ryan had long forgotten the girl who once adored him, seeing her only as a fleeting chapter in his past. More than a year passed since Ethan and Emily exchanged vows, yet their lives remained unchanged. They shared responsibilities, took Lucy on walks, and visited his parents together, but they still slept in separate rooms. Ethan honored his promise to let Emily set the pace. Their routine was disrupted by news of Ryan's return. Though Emily knew this moment would come, she wasn't ready to face him again. That weekend, Helen organized a celebratory family lunch at their country house in honor of Ryan's visit. Emily couldn't refuse to join her in-laws for the occasion. The eldest son had flown in with his girlfriend, the daughter of the director of the clinic where he worked. During the short time Ryan and Vera spent at the house, Helen had already introduced Vera to the family, shown her photo albums, bragged about their brilliant granddaughter Lucy, and even mentioned the small business Ethan had launched after getting married. Vera, pleasant and attentive, listened warmly to Helen's stories, while Ryan, detached, rocked back and forth in a chair on the porch, longing for his imminent departure. He dreaded breaking the news to his parents, unsure of how to do it without upsetting them. The thought of staying long wasn't in his plans. Vera's father had gifted them tickets to a European destination, and they were eager to leave. "How much longer are we waiting?" Ryan grumbled. "Can't we start without Ethan and his family?" "Oh, come now, dear. Your father called them. They're almost here," Helen said, her tone soft but firm. "When was the last time we were all together at the table? Let's wait a little longer." Seated beside him, Vera smiled graciously at Helen and nodded in agreement. Ryan huffed, muttering under his breath, "Still the same slacker as always," before abruptly pushing back his chair and walking away from the table. He couldn't shake the frustration building inside him, eager to drop his departure announcement and move on. "Businessman, my foot," he sneered, stepping out onto the veranda. Behind the tall fence, the rumble of an approaching car broke the stillness. A door slammed, and in the gateway appeared Ethan. He opened the gates to pull the car into the yard. "How are you holding up?" Ethan asked his wife as he parked near the terrace. Emily smiled and nodded reassuringly, her expression calm despite the tension simmering within her. Whatever challenges this family lunch brought, she knew she'd handle them. The girl she used to be, the one who let others walk all over her, was long gone. As Ethan, Emily, and Lucy walked toward the house, Ryan's eyes widened in disbelief, his gaze fixed on them. His astonished expression was almost comical, though no one seemed to notice. Helen and Vera stepped onto the porch, greeting the new arrivals. Helen introduced Emily and her precious granddaughter to Ryan and Vera. Ryan struggled to maintain his composure, though Vera, perceptive as always, noticed his inner turmoil. The brothers exchanged reluctant handshakes before everyone finally gathered at the large dining table. Emily focused on Lucy, perched on her lap, while Mason asked Ethan about his business. Helen, ever the attentive hostess, ensured plates were brimming with food. Vera, seated beside Ryan, whispered something to him, but his eyes darted between Emily, Lucy, and Ethan. Each time their gazes met, an electric jolt ran down Ryan's spine, leaving him restless. He discreetly counted on his fingers under the table, trying to piece together Lucy's age. Helen had often mentioned her in phone calls, but now his calculations didn't add up. He couldn't believe the conclusion his mind was racing toward. The announcement he'd planned to make slipped his mind entirely. He couldn't bear to stay at the table any longer. He needed answers. Yet, he didn't know how to confront his parents or Vera without drawing attention. Hours later, the opportunity arose as the family gathered by the pool. "Let's take a drive," Ryan said casually, his tone masking an ulterior motive. Emily overheard, and a knot of unease formed in her chest. Ethan glanced at her, saw the concern in her eyes, and nodded hesitantly at Ryan's suggestion. Before long, the brothers were speeding down the lone road leading to the city. Ryan broke the silence. "How is it that you're with Emily and raising my daughter?" His voice was tight with suppressed anger. "What difference does it make to you?" Ethan shot back, briefly glancing away from the road. "You left her? More than that. You abandoned her when she was pregnant. You even gave her money for an abortion. It's not your concern anymore, so stay out of our family." "What am I supposed to do? How do I live with this?" Ryan muttered, more to himself than his brother. "How do you live? The same way you always have, Ethan retorted, barely finishing his sentence when the car hit a bump, veered at a turn, and skidded off the road. Distracted by their heated exchange, Ethan had lost control. Back at the house, Emily couldn't sit still. Over an hour had passed, and neither Ethan nor Ryan had returned. Mason, where could they have gone? It's been too long, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Don't worry, Emily. They haven't seen each other in a while. They probably had a lot to talk about, Mason replied, though he soon realized her concern was growing. When another hour passed, Emily insisted they go looking for the brothers. Seeing her distress, Mason didn't argue further. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she spotted the car. It had veered off the road and landed in a ditch, its battered frame barely recognizable. She was the first to notice it, her gasp alerting Mason, who slammed on the brakes. His hands trembled on the steering wheel as he stared at the crumpled vehicle. Though it rested on its wheels, the cab was eerily empty. Emily wasted no time, her feet barely touching the ground as she sprinted toward the wreckage. Ethan! Ethan! She screamed, her voice breaking with anguish. It was as if the air had been knocked out of her lungs, leaving her gasping. Near the car, Ryan rose from where he had been crouching on the ground. He's okay. Bruises and scrapes, he'll be fine, he shouted to his sister-in-law and Mason, who was rushing behind her. But Emily didn't hear him. Ethan was slumped against the car's front door, one leg stretched out, the other bent at the knee. Emily threw herself down beside him, her eyes wild with fear. Ethan! Ethan! She sobbed, cradling his face and covering it with frantic kisses. Where does it hurt? Tell me. Tears streamed down her face in torrents, blurring her vision. In that moment, as Emily held him, she realized just how much she loved her husband. The thought of losing him was unbearable. Without him, she couldn't live. She couldn't even breathe. Ethan stirred, feeling her lips against his. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to stand still. For them, time ceased to exist as their first real kiss bridged the distance of all they had been through. Neither cared about Mason or Ryan standing nearby. It was as if, after a long separation, they were finally whole again. Ethan surrendered to Emily's kisses, the pain momentarily forgotten. By the evening, most of the day's chaos had been resolved. Emily and Ethan had returned to their city apartment, leaving Mason, Evelyn, and Ryan to gather around the family table. The family wasn't quite complete, but the air carried a quiet sense of relief. It was then that Ryan found the courage to share his news. He and Emma were leaving the next day. Their parents took the announcement with surprising grace, agreeing that, after all they had been through, everyone needed a break. Earlier, Ryan had shared a rare moment of connection with Ethan, while Mason and Emily had been searching for them. For the first time in years, the brothers spoke not as reluctant housemates, but as siblings. Ryan didn't love Emily, nor did he harbor any resentment. That day, he made Ethan a solemn promise, one he intended to keep, to let things remain as they were and never stir up trouble. The words, "none of your business," echoed in his mind like a broken record, a refrain that would guide his resolve in the days to come. A year later, the lime trees outside the hospital were in full bloom, their sweet fragrance mingling with the joy that filled the air. Ethan stood beneath the third-floor window, clutching a bouquet so large it seemed to consume him. His heart raced as he waited, anticipation buzzing through his veins. Next to him, Mason and Evelyn stood with little Lucy, who clung to her father's hand, her small feet shuffling with excitement. Emily appeared at the window, radiant and serene. Ethan waved the flowers wildly and shouted, "I love you!" A soft smile spread across her face as she leaned her forehead against the glass and whispered, "I love you too." With delicate strokes, she drew a heart on the fogged-up window. In her arms, their newborn son stirred slightly, his tiny face peaceful in sleep. When had Emily fallen in love with Ethan? It was hard to pinpoint the exact moment. Maybe it was when he brought her into his home, or when he proposed, or perhaps on those long, sleepless nights when he helped soothe little Lucy back to sleep. In truth, that love had always been there, a quiet ember glowing deep within her. All it had needed was a breath of air to ignite into a brilliant flame. That's how the story ends, friends. Join the conversation below and share your thoughts on this story. If you found it captivating, share the link with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new story that will make your heart race. Your support inspires us to create more tales. Take care and see you next time.